I'll introduce you.
Go ahead.
We see a lot of familiar faces on the call today, but standing to my right, with type demo cam, is Mr. Jim Moran, who has been here at Hamilton 11 years.
11.
Yeah.
11 going on 80 or something.
And he is the program, or nope, that's me. He is the collections officer, and he is the master printer here at Hamilton. So that's why he can take us on a wonderful field trip of what we have here at Hamilton and how we use those posters to print. So thank you for doing this today.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me do it. Um, so this is sort of my new office almost. Um, and we had a board meeting yesterday, and I don't have that many items on the monthly list. It's sort of like continue archiving, continue cleaning, continue.
I don't
So,
know.
like, yeah, we got the world's largest collection of wood type, but it's not really organized the way we'd like. And so we'll talk a little bit about it, the way we are handling a specific collection, and hopes that the rest of the collection will sort of follow that route. So um, what we're standing in the middle of is our storage area, and you actually getting to see one of the more organized portions of Enquirer. But what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how that collection comes to us and how we basically take it to the press and see what it really looks like. And it was great to see some of the posters that Val is working on, because that's pretty great work. We often come to things from the complete opposite end. And so one of the things that I pulled out today is the way that we often are looking at these, because Enquirer was a collection of 70 crates, and sometimes those crates were packed in the sense that they were going to use them again. Let's keep everything organized. And it's wonderful because as you pull them out, you know exactly what you're looking at. Maybe you've even got a copy of that to know how it should be printed. Generally, that is not the case. So I have examples of how we get some of these things. And so over to the side here, I've got a cart. And this is one of the better carts because we have these boxes, which is the way that Enquirer would pack these things up. When you were done with a job, you'd write the job number on it, which generally means nothing to us. This happens to be number 103, whatever the hell that means. They tied them up with rope, and it's a pretty great system because they were protected, and inside you've got whatever happens to be in there. This looks like it's got a horse and a lion and a tiger. So go figure, it's a circus. Now, like I said, that's one of the better organized ones, but it doesn't give me an example of whether the red should be light or dark, or whether the registration should be a little more to the left or a little to the right. Sometimes we're not even getting that, because as they put pieces together, part of a billboard might have filled the palette, so it wasn't with the rest of it. Now, I've gotten really good at looking at abstract pieces of an image and recognizing them. Not a skill I thought I would need. Now, for those of you at home who maybe have done a little bit of printing, you're probably saying to yourself, well, yeah, Jim, I know what this is. That's the ass end of a polar bear. How come you didn't recognize that? That's because the other 24 pieces are hiding somewhere else. It took looking at the grain of it and looking at the carving of it and finding all the other pieces so I could solve that mystery. But this is one massive game of concentration, because what happens is an image pops up somewhere, and then days later you find an image that looks kind of like it, and you put it together. But look at it this way. If you look at a magnesium cut or an engraving, it's sometimes difficult to tell what you're really seeing until you print it. And that's what we're running into all the time. And so there is a combined knowledge that puts things together and suddenly goes, oh, that's where the air conditioning advertisement went to, or even knowing that it has something to do with air conditioning. But in any case, we're solving it more and more, and so behind me, you're getting to see um, things that have not been gotten to. There's about 16 crates of type right there that is miscellaneous. Some of them are identified quite well with the term odds and ends. Well, we'll find out what that really means when we get into them. But the solved portion of this gets bigger and bigger. And so surrounding us are these product bins. Let's see, like this, where we have kind of figured out what's here. They are marked. And so that you now know that this is AJ Kelly Miller circus poster. It is red. It is also one of 12 sheets. So sheet being 26 by 40. Um, you start making marks on them. This is after they are cleaned and photographed, and then you found the other pieces. So generally, those are getting fairly cohesive, but that's assuming you've got all the parts. And um, so that's the great challenge: is where are the rest of the parts, and do we have them? The globe collection, by contrast, is not that coherent. It didn't come that way, and many more of the parts seem to have never arrived along with the original shipment. So, well, we're out of luck. Um, but this gets better all the time. A number of you may know collections manager Paul Pagnato has done a great job of leading this whole operation. But what it means is a collection came in and is being dissected carefully and in a thoughtful and organized way. So many of these pieces are now in a database, which you'll be able to look at online. But until then, there are orphans everywhere. So this is an orphanage for sure. There's a few families, but they don't talk to each other. Um, what we're going to do then is talk about the how we've moved into the printing aspect of one of these collections. Some of you who have watched the interview with New North, Richard Ardaw and Graham, I believe, was on that one with him. I did a little bit of discussing my work with a tiger that I did. So today we'll talk about how I proceed with those pieces that are ready to go.
Yeah.
So
There was a good question. Somebody asked, Mary asked, where do you lay them all out?
this floor becomes the place because, you know, growing up as a printer, I think our sheet size might have maxed out at 1722. So I'm not used to seeing 24 sheet billboards. And so I don't have a table that big. So the floor in here becomes that really great place where you can lay everything out. In order to photograph them, we've got a rolling stairway that's about 12 feet high that we have to climb to the top to just to get a composite picture of it. But that actually works pretty well. It also makes me think, when will a billboard get printed at Hamilton? And the day is coming, but it's not identified yet. So the floor has to be the place, because back to this game of concentration, I might have found 6 of the sheets. Steph has found 3 more in another spot. And Tom Walker comes walking up with yet another piece that may or may not fit. So, you know, we need to put these things in place so that we can think about what is missing. And that's, well, that's how you end up identifying the ass end of a polar bear, because that's the only part that isn't in the image. So that's sort of the route that we take.
Say someone wants to see the ass end of a polar bear. Where can they find it yet? I know that we don't have our collections online. Can you talk a little bit about that process of how we're working to get that available?
Yeah, it's kind of an exciting process just because we get to see it coming together as well. And so what we have done just for the museum in general is use the past perfect software to keep track of these. So one of the big jobs right now is taking the data that we've accumulated from the given image, and when you've got that piece completely put together, what we're doing is photographing each segment of it, the composite of the entire thing, and then whatever information we need from it, meaning the polar bear was part of a Christiani billboard. It is 24 sheets. It comes in this many parts, and here you happen to see the blue of the 3-color polar bear, something like that. So we're beginning to build it. I know we've got at least 1,000 entries. We're a long way off, but it is one of those great things that the more you work on it, the faster everything goes, because you've basically begun to identify the known, and so the unknowns begin to drift into place, hopefully.
That's
so
good. Before we move into the press room, there hasn't been any questions specifically, but while we're in the collection area, is there anybody either in chat or unmute and go ahead and ask while we're kind of specifically looking at this huge amount of items? Are there any questions before we go to maybe a little more print related area?
Yes. How do you clean them?
That is a great question, and it's a long question, but there's a couple of answers. And initially, what we're doing is just dry cleaning them with a rag, because there are fragments that we need to really worry about. In general, I think the blocks are made of basswood and birch, but you do come across other woods from time to time. But you got to be really careful, because you can break things off, and they can be critical to the printing. But anyway, after the dry rag rubbing, then we move on to mineral spirits, and then they're photographed. That is merely for archival initial purposes. When you get into printing them, then you need to take a whole other approach, which I can talk about later, but what that does involve is me beginning to oil the blocks as I can get to them. And I've been experimenting both with understanding oils that work best in wood. It's a little bit of Norbrylski knowledge thrown into the mix. A friend who's got her doctorate in wood studies from UW-Madison weighing in on a variety of articles, which she's lent to me so that I can, in a sense, attempt to hydrate these things again, because that's really critical to the printing portion of it. And I learned a lot by playing with the glow blocks in the old factory. I wasn't quite as versed on what they needed, and that oiling of the blocks becomes really important in terms of solidifying and strengthening them to become printable.
Are they very warped, the larger pieces of wood?
It varies a lot, and it has to do with a number of things, because what you find is that in some situations, a block has relatively little surface area remaining. And depending on the grain of the blocks, they may warp more than others. So it varies a lot. What I can tell you is that based on our weather, the storage area has really great humidity levels in the winter. They are probably at about 40% back here, because we keep it unheated, and that's ideal for them. If you bring blocks out into the press room and simply leave them, you could have a good inch off the press warping by morning. So I've got to be very slow about that process. They're impressive in that they're generally very good, but we do have some which are warped to the extent where printing them either has to be done only in one direction so that you don't crack them at all, or you don't increase a crack. Some may simply not be able to unless I hydrate it to an extreme degree. I got that experience by the factory flooding at the old place. And the obviously that was not intentional, but what we found is that even small pieces of type soaked long enough in rainwater gave them a horrible bowing or warping. Um, in talking to experts, one of the things they said is just turn them over and soak the other side and they will straighten out. Well, you got to be careful about that process too. But the other thing that I experimented with is taking trays of water and then putting the block on top of it with the warp upward and then covering it in plastic. And again, within 24 to 48 hours, the humidity of the tray actually hydrated enough of that board that it leveled out again. The challenge then is either to get it back into the proper humidity level to remain that way, or to print it before it goes back into a warp. So I've been working with that process quite a bit as well. And we even have gotten a really good environmental plan from a woman who specializes in that. And the result of it, to some extent, is a room where the blocks transition if we're printing in winter, because you want to make sure that your humidity levels are not increased or decreased too quickly, because you can find that you've got a set of beautiful blocks that you thought were good, you bring them out into the press room, and you've got rocking chairs when you're done. So, you know, we're also working on controlling that, because when people say, what is your environmental control system here? I typically say, well, either the door is open or the door is closed. That's as sophisticated as we sometimes can afford to be.
There's a good question kind of along those lines that talks about, Keith wants to know, will you attempt to repair any of the blocks that are damaged before proofing?
Yes, and we've worked on that in a number of ways. Sadly, that seems to be one of the things we don't have a lot of time for. In other words, if I see something damaged, it may just have to be put aside until that day comes. What I have experimented with is some of the type that is so badly damaged that it is no longer printable, but if it's split, then I've begun gluing those things back again and seeing what the result is when you try to print them again. And we've had fairly good success with that. That does lead you right back to the oiling, though. So a year ago, January, something like that, we worked on a Medusa print. So that is part of the Enquirer, believe it or not, oddities bunch. And so the finer areas of some of those images were breaking away, and you can leave them as they are, or you may find out that you've made a mistake, and while it seems solid when you began to print it, you almost have little pieces that are coming up and beginning to degrade the image. So that can't happen. But that brings you to the oil idea, because that does solidify them in one of the best ways that I know of. So you want to do a little bit of preemptive work, but that said, when even tiny flakes have come off, we have done gluing that has replaced them, and then when we print them again, they have disappeared in terms of having lines where pieces are missing. I think that we can go to further extremes of remaking pieces to fit in those that are gone, but that is more time and money that we don't have at this point. So the remediation is, or the repairs have to be elemental in this point, or really just setting them aside so no more harm is done. And even back in the old building, there were times where you'd be working on a block, knowing that while the initial color was great to print, the second one could not be, just too far gone. And so those are then set aside for a date where we can figure out how they might be done. One of the solutions is not repair based as much as preservation based, meaning we can do a rubbing of the color that is damaged and then scan that and then fix it in Illustrator and have, what do you want to call it, a surrogate made or a duplicate made or a copy made. That way the original block gets to never be used or harmed anymore. And you balance that just like you do with the type. Some of the type is too rare to ever be printed with. You want to keep it intact because you can't call William Page anymore. And you can't get John Kerner back to carve more blocks. So if they need to be retired, they are retired.
So there's, I think, a good last question for this area. It's nice and
Mhm.
short, and then we'll go into the space where we've got printing, which Keith has a good question about color, and I know what Jim has laid out in the next room will help with that. So really, the last question is, what kind of oil are you putting on the plates?
I started crudely because I was helping Norb Brilski, Hamilton type cutter, make patterns one day in the old building. And he got done making a great copy of the Hamilton logo. And so we finished and he said, hand me that oil. And I assumed that I was not looking at the right thing because all I could see was some 10W30 in a Quaker State can, but that's what he wanted, and he opened it up and he just dumped it over the pattern. Um, I was kind of horrified, and he said, well, that's what we do. It strengthens the wood. And he was very right that oil, once absorbed, made for a heavier, as you can imagine, but a little bit stronger piece because those pores of the wood that the oil fills into do make it stiffer and more durable. And so that was common practice, which led me to begin experimenting with a variety of oils. I think that I went from motor oil to machine oil, being a lighter, thinner grade, to where I'm at now, which is mineral oil. There doesn't seem to be a greater advantage to different oils from a preservation standpoint, but from printing, you want a lighter, cleaner oil. It allows you to get the same results, but then move to a printing stage a little bit earlier. As exciting as it is to have those first 6 print, squeeze out a little oil into what you've just done, I'm not a fan of that. But at this point, while the research is ongoing, I've used almost exclusively mineral oil. And so anything that's going to be printed or even kept needs to be oiled front and back pretty thoroughly. It's not like you can overdo it, but it really gives them, from what I can see, a pretty long life. And it sure doesn't harm the block. We know the principles from using Murphy's wood oil soap on furniture. In a way, it's a similar principle.
For those who don't know, mineral oil, and doing my research on making furniture and riglets, is what it seems to be they use a light coat of on all the furniture and riglets. You don't soak it, they just coated it with it to seal it. So mineral oil has been used a lot. If you don't know what that is, you can go to Kroger's or any pharmacy, and in the laxative area, you will find mineral oil. It's a very old, it's clear liquid, it's cutting board oil too, but you can eat it, it doesn't hurt you, but that's the best place to get mineral oil if you don't need gallons. You want a little bit to play with.
Yeah, Scott's completely right, because if you go to Home Depot and look for mineral oil, which they assume you're going to use on furniture, you can pay $8 for a really small bottle. Whereas if you go to a pharmacy, you can get about 4 times that much for a little bit less. If you really look into it, you can buy a drum of that stuff for an even better deal. And honestly, I think we will reach that point because we've got thousands of blocks and we could oil them all. And the great thing is, if you get a little irregular, you can drink the stuff. So, you know, you got that advantage going for you too.
And something you need to be very careful with, though, because I had someone did this on me. Baby oil that has a fragrance in it is also have mineral oil, and you can get it mineral oil that has it smells pretty, but it's horrible, you know, to smell it all day long on your wood. So also I bought a type from someone on end grain cherry, and it was so dry that I soaked it overnight in a bowl of mineral oil and ruined it. Erin put it into her type cases, and she says it leaked oil back into the type cases forever. So you just wipe it on. You don't soak that end grain.
So, side note, Planten Moretus in Antwerp, Belgium, has a marvelous collection of, I would say, 18th century cuts, wood engravings, and they were attempting to eradicate pests and oil the blocks at the same time. Unfortunately, the pesticide that they used still means that nobody gets to use those blocks without incredible ventilation, because 200 plus years later, that stuff is still basically off-gassing. So,
On those beautiful notes, it might be time to travel.
all right, let's do that.
I'm gonna do that. So if you get seasick, look away. We are going to just take a short little trip. We'll go through the museum to the staff press room where Jim has laid out his latest print that he did. It's a big tiger. It's awesome. It's colorful and it's gorgeous. So I think it's time. Take that guy.
Sure.
And I'll take this one.
And while you're moving, just a quick note: if you've ever bought wood type from Boggs up in Cleveland, I was there a couple times. He sprays all his wood type with WD-40 because it takes better pictures for his sales. And everyone seems to think that's fine. I would never use WD-40, which is just a really, really light oil. But if you ever buy type from Boggs and smell, that's what you're going to smell, is the WD-40.
Yeah, and I think that because it is a little heavier grade, it's difficult when you're trying to clean it off and then move to printing of it. Motor oil is probably best for patterns, but I think that you're right. There's a little bit of a weight of the liquid problem with that. One of the things that I would like to get an answer to is the fact that Hamilton historically sold blocks to everybody for carving. And again, big bass and birchwood blocks that were typically one sheet size. They sold them in a variety of sizes. One of their big customers was Hatch Showprint. And while this doesn't have the connection yet that I want, we also find that Hatch was buying oil by the drum, 25 gallons. You wouldn't have needed that for the machines, right? Even a pony or a Babcock isn't going to go through a drum of oil in a short period of time or even months. But what we're speculating is that they were buying oil for the blocks so that they could oil them, and then when it came time to carve them, they would not have dried out. But that's conjecture on my and Jim Sheridan's part at this point. So I'm hoping to make that connection to prove that point. Well, we can talk a little bit about the one that I have been working on. And again, I began by cleaning it and then going over it with the mineral oil a number of times. And so I'll begin to show you where that tends to be most advantageous on a block. When you're printing, the solid areas are typically pretty durable and not a problem. But when we look at the areas where, well, you'll see that it is the grass of the print or the teeth, those things are small wooden projections that that have a tendency to be weakened over time, and so they would have a tendency to flake up more. Um, it goes back to a number of things that you have to be careful of when you're printing, and specifically when you're working with inking, you want to be going with the grain all the time. It is when you go against it that you tend to have problems. The pressure doesn't hurt these as much as the tackiness of the ink in terms of wanting to pull up any loose fibers of wood. So what I've learned is that the oiling almost wholly eliminates that problem. So I knew that this was a tiger. I knew that I really wanted to print it, and unlike a lot of the other posters, I had an example of it that I could refer to. So a 4-color piece. I'll show you the 3 other colors. I may need you, Steph, to. Should we hold them up?
Yeah.
All right. Well, then we have yellow. Wait, we'll go back down with that. Red plate, maybe bring that up a little bit. One of the reasons to look at this one pretty closely is you start to see the skill of a guy named John Kerner who worked for Enquirer. And in essence, he's ruled lines into this to create the cross-hatching for effective shading. And they don't uniformly run in the same direction. So you have a diagonal in this area, and it is changed when you get into another area. In some cases, they overlap because they're cutting it a variety of ways. So when I'm inking, that's really critical because you can fill those gaps rather quickly, but also they vary in tone, so that in some cases they're very solid. As they moved into a solid area or into a negative area, sometimes they are so light that they're nearly like a dot pattern. So maintaining your dot pattern is a big deal in offset, and it's obviously no different in printing here too. The blue is the one that gave me issues to contend with. We can talk about that in a moment, but here again, we have almost uniformly horizontal cutting in it. And so that is consistent with being different from the red, because you don't want to obviously combine lines in the same direction or it's ineffective. If they are not at the correct angle, much like anybody who ever had to make plates with negatives and screens, if you put your screen in the wrong direction, you get more A patterns. You can do this here in a sense as well.
Can you get closer to the camera where we can see the lines?
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Thanks. That makes that clearer.
Yeah, thanks, Ray.
And over here, there's the 2 different, yeah, even down here.
Right, over there you
Yeah.
have vertical, and so much of this is horizontal.
Yeah.
Go the other way. You know, one of the things to look at is those teeth. They've got, they have a horizontal cutting in it. I would have thought that the teeth would maybe not be for color, or maybe they could be left white, but you'll see why not in a moment or two moments. All right, here's black, and this is um, this has quite a variety of cross hatching in it as well. So now you begin to see that it also varies in tone, where you've got parts of that mane where this is actually curving. In other words, it can't be strictly diagonal, horizontal, or vertical. It's got to wave into whatever pattern is working with the overall image. So, in terms of printing it, I did have something to go by, and that was quite helpful. The yellow tends to be pretty standard in terms of being a straight Pantone yellow. Registration-wise, the blocks are pretty well cut, so that was quite helpful to me. What you begin to wonder about when you're beginning the second color is, am I putting this in the right spot? What if registration is off? I'm not going to know until I've done the whole thing. So I'll grab first a yellow alone and then a yellow with red added. Sure. You can hold the yellow and then I'll bring that one over, and then we can. So from yellow to yellow-red combined. And, you know, there are areas that you get a sense of where things should be. Back to the teeth, you realize that, well, the color's got to sit in there somewhere. In this situation, I was free to look at the original poster for help, but there is also that knowledge of, is this supposed to be a straight yellow, or should there be variations in it? Because if these guys were running a color light or dark or with a little bit of additive, those notes are not there anymore. So I ran it this way, and I figured because Jim Sherrod knew so much about it, we decided, why not test this and run it with an alteration of the yellow to see how that works. Be back with that. I'll let you hold that one. And we can go back and forth. We can afford to be.
Someone did ask what paper you're using.
In this case, I'm using a 100-pound classic crest. It's a Nina. But so here you can see what happens when you take that yellow and you begin adding to it a little bit. You know, you think of the way they intended certain things, and then the variations that you may add artistically to get what might be, well, a more orange-looking tiger, I guess. So, and so you can go from that and then just step aside and we'll do both. If you want to hold up part of that stuff.
Oh yeah.
For a next to it, there you go. So not a great amount of difference, but when you go for the third color, you begin to find out what you did right or wrong. I think I should be moving a little faster. I feel like time's running.
I will let you know. We are at 12:45.
Okay, so I move on to the blue. And I knew that in the original that this is supposed to be the grass, right? Well, when you run it in what I thought was the correct blue, what actually happened is it stayed blue. And then you start realizing maybe you should have varied your other colors a little bit. This particular area in here, oddly, was green as well. And it was coming out a horrible blue, which is very interesting. So maybe it's not horrible, but you begin thinking, okay, now we got 3-color teeth. Are those centered where they ought to be? The mouth looks pretty good. Things are beginning to get a bit more identified, though it is still a pretty interesting looking tiger in all of those tones. Now, there is something about this which is counter to standard viewing. You never look at a circus poster from 8 inches away like I'm doing, right? This is something to be looked at from a distance. But anyway, I played with the blue quite a bit, and these are preliminary sketches. But when I got something that at least gave me a little bit of green, I felt like I was getting closer to the way it should be.
I think it's good to show the process, right? That
Yeah.
it doesn't come out and we don't get we don't get a thing that says it's exactly this color, exactly this percentage. There's some printing forensics happening as you're working. So I think it's nice that we can share that process. Yeah, there was a good question about the outcome changing when you print the colors in a different order. And so that's what we're talking about is right now we're going specifically in this order from the print knowledge that Jim has, and Jim Moran will talk to Jim Sheridan from Hap Show Print to bring that knowledge together to make informed decisions. And then the printing allows them to then go back and maybe print it again later, looking at what happened from the actual print.
Right. So when I ran the blue too heavy and a little too dark, you can see that, well, the blue grass is not offensive, but it's not the way it's supposed to be. However, the black ties this entire thing together in a phenomenal way. And it's always stunning to me how much detail. But also I was learning a bit about the volume of ink. On the first 3 colors, you'd almost want to set your rollers incredibly high, run that very light to allow those colors to show through, because they did not use transparent ink. Now, this is a print with the yellow standard without the variation. So you see the blue of the lower main, or whatever that is supposed to be. Not a bad looking piece, but sort of curious from a color standpoint. So I'll get the variation of that now with the darker yellow. Mm-hmm. And you can take that up and show it, and I'll come over. So you can see that that darker yellow actually is more tiger-like, because now we can go to the original. Come on back in, Steph, because I think there's an interesting contrast here. Now, this is a, I don't know, 70-year-old poster, something like that. So it's faded some, but you do see that while there is an intended 4-color effect, and the green does come out. I don't think tigers have green hair, but who am I to say? But the grass does look the appropriate color, which is what I have to check it on. But in the end, I think overall the tiger itself is still successful, and it's mostly because it was carved so well and the blocks registered really, really well. Steph, if you don't mind bringing them that face as close as you can, that'll give them a really nice sense of that. So I'm happy with it. You know, it isn't a perfect reproduction, but it's really an effective one. And if I ran it again, I would certainly make some changes to it. You know, one of the things that I always want to do, and I'm working with these, is to attempt to reproduce them faithfully first. We can do a lot of things with changing the colors, sometimes in outrageous ways for effect. Why not? But I still like to see what their intention was before it becomes what my intention is. And for those of you who have been here since the last Ways Goose, we did buy a large press specifically for that, because one of the big flaws in my printing was my own inking. It is difficult to maintain a very even pressure on your brayer. And so what I found is that, like I said, I was getting a little bit of a gain, which was not effective, but also you don't control it well. It's a little heavy here, a little light there, no different than the advantage we have going from hand braying to a Vandercook or something like that. So so they're fun explorations. And you know, the thing that encourages me is that for a difficult to register piece, it came out fairly well, and we can move on to the next one. So
And to that point, we've got a couple good questions.
mhm.
And I know these can go long, so I'm gonna interject with a Hamilton ad right now. So, because then we'll get to your guys' questions with our eye on time. It's about 12:53, so
Mhm.
you know. So I want to invite everyone back to Hamilton tomorrow digitally. We are going to be on the United in Isolation, which, if you haven't joined, it is a Facebook. They do Facebook Live videos. It's an online letterpress festival, and it's really wonderful. It starts at noon Central tomorrow, and I'll put a link into the chat so you can join us. We're going to be on for 20 minutes, and we're going to be on with three other printers. So there's going to be people streaming from Sweden, Peru, the Netherlands, and us here in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. So we're really happy to be a part of that. If you haven't seen them, they have posted their previous ones they've done, but it's really fun. We've been kind of peeking in on them the whole time they've been doing them. So
Yeah,
we wanted
and
to
we'll
make
talk a little about this and other
Yeah,
things. So
yeah. We'll show the pantograph, which we haven't done on a ham hang yet.
that's true.
So if you haven't seen the pantograph yet, that's a good time to come in. And we like to drop weird little tidbits all the time. So, so I did want to say that, and I want to say two other things, because we've got some Hamilton hangs coming up. And let's see, I'm going to do a copy and paste so that you can see the next ones. And we just added one to the timeline. So here are our next ones you can join us for. But there's one that's not on that list, and I'll go update our website today. But next, let's see if I can get to the right spot. So next, I'm blanking out. It's going to be the 18th at 12 noon Central, and we're doing one that is specifically talking about protest posters and how the power of the press is so important. And so we're going to have three speakers with us. So I'm going to get that link and get that information, and I will make sure I get that into the chat as well. So,
all right.
Okay, so let's go back to some of our questions. So,
Stephanie, I'm sorry to interrupt you and be so rude, but before we leave, I've been getting all these emails from people. I want to make sure you don't ruin type. Mineral oil is for side grain. It is not for end grain. You use it on cutting boards and use it on plywood. You use it on side grain or big slabs of wood. If you put mineral oil on your end grain wood, it will soak in like a sponge and you will be very, very sorry. When Jim says mineral spirits, he's talking about paint, a really good paint there. Mineral spirits is what you use on wood type. And he taught me this 10 years ago. Again, mineral spirits. Please don't mix them up. People are going, oh, I ruined it already. And I'm going, no. Do not use mineral oil on end grain. That's all. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I think part
Thanks
of
for the clarification.
yes, that's one of the great things about this group is that we are all here to help educate each other. So please don't be sorry. In fact, it allowed me to jump on a different computer so I can tell you exactly about that meeting on the 18th. So thank you, Scott. So on at June 18th at 12 p.m., we're going to have 3 individuals. So we're going to have well, 3 kind of groups, but 4 people. Jessica Spring, Chandler O'Leary, Ben Blunt, and does anyone know Lee's last name from Signal Return? Markalonis. So we're going to have those 4 individuals, and they're going to be talking specifically about protest posters and the power of print. And we're doing that along with Learning Letterpress, which is another one of these groups that does Zoom calls where they talk very specifically about printing processes, and it's kind of more class-based. So I'll make sure to get that link in there. Okay.
Hey.
Yeah?
Will that be recorded? Because I actually can't make that one.
Yes, those are recorded as well, and we'll cross-post both on Learning Letterpress as well as on Hamilton's site. So I'm working with Dory over there. She's great, and she was the one who kind of helped get that all started. She said, how can we talk about the power of press? So
okay, that's one of Dory's series?
It is one of Dory's series, yes.
Which is also a wonderful series if any of you haven't seen it.
It is, yep, Learning Letterpress on YouTube. I'll put some links over while Jim's answering some of the questions. So, sweet. Thank you.
Stephanie?
Yes.
Could you put on information about tomorrow's event on the website too?
I will. That's a really good point. Thank you.
Oh, and by the way, I don't know if you can see it, but see my coffee cup here.
We do. He's got the WPR coffee cup.
All right.
That was one Jim and I designed for WPR when we were over in the other museum, 2012?
No, that was your first year?
Yeah, so 2011.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that was a long time ago. So we've got some good questions. I'll start you off one that you can talk about for a bit. And it is 12:58. So I do want to say thank you all for coming. If you have to go to other calls or you have to go eat or you have to go do something, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jim. This has been amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
When you go to Jim 2 days before and go, hey, can you do an impromptu talk about Enquirer collection, what you've been printing lately? And he says yes. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. So let's see. One of the questions specifically is, can you tell if the parallel lines were cut with a V gouge or some other tool that did multiple cuts lines at a time? I know we know a little bit about that process. Can you talk about it at all?
Well, I cannot say too much. It seems that is V-shaped, but there are also variations within it. So like the engraver's ruling machine, we see some are almost hairline, and then some are a bit wider, and they vary within a given line, as if you could take a rather broad V and then narrow that down as you worked your way to the edge of the line. They are also flowing in really interesting ways, which makes you think that there had to be some very interesting handwork done. But, you know, we've got a really great interview with Anderson, the grandfather of the current owners, and he talks about Kerner, but you know, that was not the main topic of the interview. So while he talks about Kerner and the machine that he made specifically for it, I have not gotten details. The Andersons were children when this happened, and so they don't remember so well either.
So more to learn on it.
Mm-hmm.
What press are you using? You can actually kind of see the press, but we could show that a little more.
Yeah, this is one of a number that we have. It is a budget 1-hour sign press, and sometimes they say Chicago on them, sometimes they say Milwaukee. We built our own table for it to be a little more massive. but it is really a simple sign press. But it's got a 40 by 60 bed, which is wonderful because you can run a 2-sheet piece on it. Registration is not ideal, but in the case of this one, I simply taped a piece of chipboard so that I could maintain my edge and relied on the consistency of the blocks. And in this case, it worked well. That doesn't always happen.
And what was the name of the press that we are going to start to use once we?
We'll be using the Campbell, the country press, and that has a, I think, 43 by 30 bed. So the challenge there is finding paper because I like the fact that you can run a 1 sheet with a bleed. That was what we were looking for. But I don't have much here that is over 28 by 40, which is great, other than taking end rolls that we got from paper companies. But you know, when it's 4 feet long and you're unrolling a spool, it's not square. I guess that's the truth of it.
And I think a good last question is, how long did it take you to do all the tests, like from the beginning to kind of the final print?
This was about 16 hours or so of work. And, you know, just because of the nature of what's going on here, if I could get 3 hours straight on it, that was great. But, you know, I'll try to sell a few of these, and then we'll, if there's a demand, we'll do a longer run of them on the Campbell and probably get a little bit better results, at least if you like your grass green, you know.
So did you guys have any last questions as we kind of wrap up this event? Oh, what about using a commercial cloth bolt cutting machine for cutting the paper?
Well, that could be a really good idea. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, thanks.
I think we're good.
I worked at a commercial bindery and they used one of those, so you were able to attach a whole bolt. So the end bolt of paper, I don't know if the core would be a different standard than what they use at cloth, but it seemed to cut pretty square edges.
Yeah, that seems like a really good idea. I would think that that would be helpful. When Appleton Coated Paper Company, which was an hour west of here, went out of business, or even when they were still in business, they gave us 4-foot rolls. We've got a 6-foot roll, but you know, you can imagine the difficulty of trying to cut that cleanly and in quantity.
Just have Stephanie hold it for you.
She's said no so many times, I'm not even going to try anymore.
This has been incredible to see, Jim. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Wow.
thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
I don't mean to butt in again, but we do have the poster that is from Woodcuts here. It's J.I.K.'s Threshing Machine Company from Racine, Wisconsin. You can see the same kind of cross-hatching on it.
Can you bring that close again for a moment?
To the face?
Yes, please. Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
And I don't know if it was used or not, but for my muzzle loading gun making period a long time ago, a checkering, C-H-E-K-E-R-I-N-G, a checkering tool is used to put the parallel grooves on gun stocks. And someone once told me, an old woodworker, that he used his checkering tool to do wood blocks for carving. I have no idea, but that's something to look into, checkering.
You know, I think you're right, Scott. We've got a poster here called Asylum of Horrors, and after they cut it, I think mostly on with a router, there was a nice bordering along the edge which was checkered, and it would make sense that you could have done that with probably a hammer and a die.
Yeah, it's a hand tool, so you can follow a nice curve.
Right. Right.
Oh, Jim, I do have a question. That eagle one is printed on fabric. Have you come across any posters that are printed on fabric?
Let's see. Well, yes. Not posters, but I've seen some really impressive bag work, and both on paper bags and on cloth bags, because flour, as you know, all the way up to 50-pound sacks were done with incredible precision. I'm kind of floored. I'd like to see that being done.
Sweet.
All right. All right.
Cool. Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you
Yeah,
all
yeah,
for
thank
joining
you.
us. This was a really,
Thanks for coming.
yeah, it was a really good way to spend a Friday.
Mhm.